calm down.
Joining me now is Gordon Chang, columnist for the Daily Beast, who's written extensively on the region. Gordon, what do you think of today's announcement from Korea and North Korea? And what do you think of what the president just said right there?
Well, what the president said about, there was going to be war before he took over, that's clearly not right. The Obama administration had a policy of strategic patience to try to wait the North Koreans out, so there really was no tension. We're talking about war on the Korean Peninsula because of fire and fury and some of the other things the president said, which were intended to get the North Koreans to the bargaining table. But, the threat of war was when Trump took office.
What do you think of the announcement from North Korea that they're willing to do all these things, which sound very good, in exchange for concessions from the U.S.?
Well, the Kim family and progressive governments in South Korea are very good at creating euphoria. The problem, though, is that they've not been able to sustain it over a long period. And part of it is because the Kim family has really not been able to deal with the international community in good faith, including the South Koreans. So there was some progress. There were some gestures. That's a good thing, but they weren't what we really wanted to hear.
But what about these specific, not promise or pledge to dismantle a complex that enriches the bulk of its uranium? I mean, that seems like a big deal, or do you disagree? Oh,
no, clearly. The promise to dismantle Yongbin is really critical because that's the only place where they can process plutonium, which is fissile material for nuclear weapons. But they said, look, we need reciprocal concessions from the U.S., and they didn't specify what they are. We don't know what they are, probably relief from sanctions, but it's going to be big. And it's going to be big because, as you say, taking apart Yongbin is a really important item on the U.S. wish list.
How would we be sure that they were actually doing it, though? Would they be allowing in monitors to check to see if that was really happening? Well,
with Yongbin, clearly there would have to be either U.S. or international Atomic Energy Agency inspectors, largely because the UN has to have a role in this.
What about the halt in the missile tests? Do they need to be doing missile tests any longer?
No, at least not now. And the reason is that they've got a lot of material, a lot of telemetry from all those series of tests. Also, the missiles that they've been testing are not really that sophisticated. They're big and powerful, but other countries have them. And so the North Koreans can get this information from other places.
And the president said we'll see if he's going to meet with Kim Jong-un again. Do you believe that means it's more likely that they will have a second summit?
I think that they will, Katie, and the reason is Kim clearly wants the summit. He said that in that letter to President Trump. President Trump wants to have a summit, so eventually it's going to occur. It may not occur this month, which some people have been speculating about, in New York at the UN General Assembly meeting, but I think that it will occur at least a couple months down the road.
So are things working so far?
Things are working in a sense. President Trump, before he went to Singapore for the summit with Kim Jong-un, said he was going to give the North Koreans this one-shot opportunity to do the right thing. And so there's been a lot less U.S. pressure on the North Koreans. We've not enforcing sanctions with the same vigor. We've not been doing a lot of other things. And the question is whether Kim will respond. And a lot of people, including me, are skeptical. But, at least people can say that things are going in the right direction.
Nikki Haley accused Russia of subverting those sanctions that we've imposed on North Korea. How is Russia, and for that matter China, affecting the negotiations and affecting U.S. policy towards North Korea?
They're affecting the negotiations by putting a lot of money into Kim Jong-un's coffers. Not as much as he wants, but certainly as much as he needs. And they've been doing that by buying North Korean coal, which is a violation of UN sanctions. China's been doing that. Russia has been having these ship-to-ship transfers on the high seas, also a violation of UN sanctions. And matter of fact, Russia and China have been openly violating these rules, and the South Koreans say, oh, look, we'll violate them too, which is what they did just a few days ago with opening up that liaison office.
What about the tariffs and the trade war that's happening between the U.S. and China? How is that affecting North Korea policy?
Well, I think, certainly Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, is not in a mood to help President Trump or the United States on tariffs. But I think that we've got to impose these tariffs because the Chinese have been stealing hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. intellectual property each year. And we don't have a choice. We got to deal with the Chinese on North Korea, and we got to deal with them on tariffs. And unfortunately, I don't think we have that luxury to say, oh, we'll just deal on one issue.
Gordon Chang, good to see you. But I guess when we talk, usually it's because something terrible is happening.
I'll try not to come around again.
Gordon Chang, thank you very much.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.